welcome to Comedy Album Book Club. This week's special guest is Kelly Zemnickis, talking about Brock and John's Unrehearsed. Keep on listening to Comedy Album Book Club. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. This week we have a very special friend of the podcast, my co-host on Order Up, Kelly Zemnickis, super funny comedian, documentarian, and awesome person. She brought us Brock Simpson and John Mitchell's Unrehearsed. This is an album from the mid-90s, comedy duo, sketch and musical comedy from Toronto. Not a lot of history on this one. Just listen to the episode. You're going to have a great time. Take care. Zemnickis, my first guest in a long time.
Yay.
Welcome to Comedy Album Book Club.
Oh, thank you so much. I was just wondering, do you have a name for your studio?
No, I'm going to have to figure one out.
I think Ardill Sound.
That's a good name. That's our
just
good
sounds
name.
good. Just came to mind.
Yeah, I will. Ardill Sound. Welcome to the Ardill Sound Studio. So how have you been doing?
I've been good. It's always, I think, a loaded question when you're of a certain age. You can go down so many roads.
Oh yeah.
How really am I doing? But I think overall, I have things I could complain about, but the good outweighs the bad. So
that's always that's the general sum you want to end up at.
Exactly.
Nothing's ever always going to be great.
Right.
It's just what's the math work out to?
Exactly. Even in a Disney movie, there's a villain.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah. But I'm good. I think I'm good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, you have brought me a really interesting blast from Toronto comedy past.
I know.
I've never heard of it. Unrehearsed, 1995, by Brock and John.
Yeah.
Brock Simpson and John Mitchell.
Yes.
So, how did you find this?
So, I started in comedy, I think around, I want to say 92 or 93 in Toronto. I was working as a stage manager and tech for sketch shows, because with Kids in the Hall and that kind of vibe, Toronto was a real hotbed for sketch comedy and improv. Definitely stand-up was happening, but sketch was the thing, And so I was working at clubs that don't exist anymore, like Big City Improv, do some time at the Rivoli, wherever a show was being put on. So Brock Simpson was somebody I would always kind of meet in passing. Mm-hmm. And John I didn't know as well, but they were kind of the dudes you wanted to be involved with a show in at that time. I mean, they were hot on the Fringe circuit, the Toronto Fringe circuit, and just were the guys you wanted to hang out with. So it was from my days as being a stage manager that I was sort of tipped off in their direction. And I can't think of how many shows I stage managed for them. I feel like it was 2. But definitely one of them, Kid Canuck, was one of the shows I stage managed for Brock. But yeah, just amazing lyricist, super funny, and we're just the it duo of, they were friends, they weren't a couple, but it was just the it guys that you wanted to hang out with and do a show with.
Yeah, so it's kind of neat that, this is just around this would be when Kids in the Hall were on TV, so
exactly.
This would be in the follow-up to that, and I do really remember there was a lot of sketch comedy, a lot of, just like you said, it's just that was that time.
It absolutely was. It's wonderful to go and think back and think of all the times that I was, as a teenager running around on the subway trying to get props to make things and, build this and do that, and then still, be amongst the at least when I started, these smoked-filled comedy clubs. So building props amidst the haze of all the cigarette smoke and everything.
Youngsters today don't understand how much of a different time it was. In the 90s.
It was so different. I mean, I would come home from, nights working at, wherever on Queen Street, and my mom would be like, "Get in the shower, you smell like an ashtray." Like I just stank.
Yeah.
But it was so much fun. And I remember the CBC, I can't think right now of what year it was that they did this, but the CBC had a sketch comedy show. They had done comics where they highlighted comedians in a little special, but then they had a sketch series, which I believe was called Sketchcom, if I'm not mistaken. And so to get a spot on that show and see those things that I was rushing around to like Active Surplus or like wherever I was going to get props, and to see somebody build the things that I built, in my basement, but like on an actual TV set. Yeah. I remember when Don Ferguson and Roger Abbott came to the Rivoli to watch a troupe I was with at the time called the Stand-Ins. And there was such Roger and Don are here because they were from Air Farce, this very beloved Canadian series that I ended up working on years later. But that was like, we knew we were on sort of the tipping point of something really cool happening. So it was a really great time to be on the Toronto comedy scene because stuff was coming to life, Yeah.
And I mean, we still have a bit of that. I mean, you look at acts like Tall Boys.
Yep.
Bruce saw them at Sketchfest.
Exactly.
And decided, I want to produce their TV show. So we still have that a bit, but it doesn't feel... It doesn't feel as present as it was back then.
And there was a grit. I think when you're, when you were coming out of the 80s and trying to figure out what the 90s were going to be, there was this sense of play that I don't feel as much around anymore, but it was just like messy and risky and funny and dark but just goofy, and it was a great time to figure out who you were as a comic, what people were gravitating towards, the silliness, the bizarro. It was just a really fun time to see stuff come to life in this city.
That's one of the things listening to this album, because we just sat and listened to it together, which was amazing. Because it's not of it. Audience,
you can't
if you
find
go
it
looking
anywhere.
For this, good flipping luck.
Basically, come to my house and I'll play it for you.
Which is unfortunate because it's funny as hell. It stands up.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't get many comedy duos to begin with.
Right.
It's more common in musical comedy, which is what this is. But that alone, you don't get much of, even in the sketch world. But it was... not saying it was light, but it reminded me of, Kids in the Hall a lot.
Yes.
Because it had that sort of absurdist, sort of Brucio kind of energy to a lot of the sketches. And it mixed sketches. The album itself mixed sketches.
Yeah.
Which held up. I don't know if they just actively went through their sketches that they recorded. And these are the ones that are visual, but are descriptive enough or storytellery kind of enough that they don't need the visuals, or it's just, it's either great writing or great editing. Either way, that's an incredible skill. Yeah,
and it's really not date stamped of the time too much. Like, there's one line where they refer to sending a fax.
Yes.
In one of the songs.
And a payphone, which I think there's one left that all the drug dealers in Toronto use right now.
But other than that, you're right. Like, sitting with you and listening to it, they just sound like really good 90s songs, mixed amongst some live action sketch. So
and I mean, it was neat too because they would mix. There's a mix of live performance and produced performance. So you got a really good judge. It's like somebody with a ukulele or a guitar up on the stage singing. It's like, okay, they're good in that format, but can they bring it? And there was like a Weird Al level of parody skill. I mean, maybe not Weird Al because that's sort of like parody Beethoven, but it was up there because I mean, as I was sort of thinking about what bands that I could hear.
Yeah.
And I mean, I heard Bryan Adams, like that last song.
Yeah, Me and the Boys.
Me and the Boys, definitely a Bryan Adams vibe. The Spinal one. Had a very shadowy Man on a Shadowy Planet feel to me.
Yep.
You had some Treble Charger, Pursuit of Happiness, Bare Naked Ladies, which are all contemporary bands of that era.
Yeah, Arrogant Worms a little bit too.
Yeah.
You know, just in the wordplay.
Yeah. So you had that. You had stuff that felt like you turned on Much Music.
Yes.
Between me embarrassing myself at Speaker's Corner and the music videos, you could feel the sounds in the air of Toronto at that time.
Yeah.
So it was kind of cool because it brought me back to like, you know, first year university. You know,
right.
It's like I would be down the street, you know, at Sanctuary, or Savage Garden, dancing away, and then this would be just a few doors down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our paths probably crossed on Queen West back in the day.
Very much so. Very much. Guaranteed.
But you're right in that you would have seen that. I mean, I know Much Music, as I remember it as a teenager, is no longer in existence. And I don't think it lasted online either. But you would have seen Me and the Boys, which is a song about guys trying to get a song right, which is just a wonderful turn there in the tune. But you would have seen that video on Much Music. Like 100%, you would have seen that mixed in with, you know, like a Led Zeppelin or a B&L or a Michael Jackson, and then Brock and John. Like you would have seen that on TV, which is so great. But Brock... I'm just looking up at like the different shows that he wrote, but he had like Honest Ed, The Bargain Musical, Kid Canuck, This Could Be Love, kind of in that whole, it came a few years later, but like that whole Drowsy Chaperone era, which was born out of a wedding gift to Janet Vandergraff and Bob Martin, became this huge Broadway hit. But it was like kind of along that lineage of those wonderful musical comedy shows that Brock just was so good at crafting, you know? Yeah, super talented guy. Also, I think I mentioned it earlier. I think he's like featured in the Prom Night movies, if I'm not mistaken. He's also got like, just total sidebar, weird acting gig too. But no, such an amazing lyricist, and those two just made such a killer comedy combo.
Yeah,
you know.
But I mean, and you know, it's not just the musical parody that works because it's a 17-track. Album. It ranges from about 30 seconds. The longest is 9 minutes.
Yes.
Which you think is too long just looking at that number. And it is actually probably the most visual.
Yes.
Which, you know.
King Joe is the track.
Which, you know, and that one had as opposed to like the others which tapped into pop music, this tapped into a very like Les Mis, Shakespearean vibe.
Yeah.
And was so Toronto.
Oh, so Toronto. And you've got like if you're able to find and listen to it, friends, it covers all of the parks in the city of Toronto, and just has elements of it that I feel like today wouldn't be terribly kosher in how they refer to some people who, as we say, unhoused. But again, going back to that sort of period, there's a lot wrong about it, but it still works. And they find a caring aspect to it and a sympathy in it, and it goes kind of, oh no, but then I don't know, they find the heart of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's
wonderful.
Not mean.
No,
like, it's definitely, there's nobility in these characters, and very much so if you ever hear it. And it's yes, there's language that doesn't age well, but it wasn't used maliciously. It was used because that was the language that we used at the time.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, it's something audiences struggle with in contextualizing, and I mean that's one of the things on Comedy on Book Club, I really try to make sure we do is we contextualize this within the voice of the period.
Correct.
And that was the thing. It was like they took a story about unhoused people and the parks, and which was, you know, just as it is now, it was very much a problem. I remember that period where I'd be coming home from clubs and you'd have cops going, I'd be getting like a sub after leaving the bar, and you'd have cops coming in and trash talking squeegee kids, because that was the big thing in the mid 90s when kids from Montreal and the East Coast running away from home and living on the streets, cleaning windows, just trying to make a dime. Literally back then, a dime.
Yeah, a dime.
Yeah.
Which got you a lot more.
yeah, you could actually buy things with a dime. Yeah, so it is, and I think this kind of spoke to this. I mean, it's more geared towards the elder unhoused, but it was very much just like, you know, these people are people with a story, and, you know, we shouldn't ignore them. And yeah, like all of these, like, you had like the Simon and Garfunkel,
Mrs. Crenshaw. It's such a beautiful song.
It is. Like, if I just heard that and wasn't paying attention, I thought, oh, this is lovely. That, you know, it's sort of it's that sort of pop folk vibe.
It's like if Mrs. Robinson just aged 20 years, you know?
Yes.
She was hanging out with Mrs. Crenshaw in her, you know, careful footwear.
Yeah. And then
supportive footwear.
And you have that juxtaposed with like Son of Larry?
Son of Hello Larry. Yeah.
Son of Hello Larry.
Yeah.
Like leading right into that. Sorry, my notes are a little illegible here.
That's okay.
Where it was just such a weird and silly, fun little tight bit.
Yes. Yeah, they threaded those little live segments, which in the album notes says it was recorded at the Little Alex. I have a feeling that would have been the Poor Alex on Brunswick, which is now no longer there. But there was a sister theater to the Royal Alex Theater on Brunswick where I cut my comedy chops back in the 90s, going back to Roger and Don. Air Farce started there. I mean, that nook right beside the Future Bakery is Toronto comedy, like sacred ground.
Which is nice that now we have
the lab right beside it. Yeah.
I mean, that is an interesting space. If I ever perform there, I got to talk about the date that I had there years ago.
Oh.
Where it was my ex-wife, and it was a goth bar back then.
I went there when it was a rave club.
It went through some transitions because it was like the kid. They're like the owners of Futures. It was their kids who ran it, and it was like the communist. It was called like Lenin or something.
Yeah, it's been a few things.
Yeah, but it was like a communist themed goth bar.
Yeah, that corner is historic.
Yeah, a lot happened, and I literally just lived right down the street, so I just like stumble home.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's nice that it's at least still a comedy space.
Definitely. Yeah, the comedy roots run deep there. I mean, even if you go across the street, it's now, I think, like a used clothing shop. But when it was the Brunswick House and the Sketcherson started there with Gary Rideout Jr. And yeah, that corner of Bloor and Brunswick, I mean, I know Honest Ed's is no longer a space and Markham Village is no longer a space. But for those who don't know, like, the Toronto Fringe Hub being there and the comedy that came out of those blocks around Bloor and Bathurst, that needs a plaque, if anything, I think, because so many laughs are just embedded into that concrete from over the years with, you know, guys like these. And Lisa Lambert is another voice on the album. Lisa went on to pen Drowsy Chaperone and win herself a couple of Tonys. But she was in the Schlur.
Yeah, the cha-cha song.
Yeah, which is
I was just
such
like so hilarious. It was just like, oh
when
my god.
When you do the Schlur, do. It's so fun.
Such a great song.
Yeah. And then that trombone thing, they do one of the, I just got it before I forget, one of the little, incidentals that they put in between the songs. They have 77 trombones where Brock has confused coronets with corvettes.
They're pulling the floats. There's no floats in a musical band.
I love that.
Yeah.
As someone who for years spent her life convinced that the Bee Gees had a song called Four Letter Woman. It is more than a woman, just so you know. I can relate to thinking there were corvettes in that song. I love it. But can we please talk about my favorite track on the album?
Okay, yes.
Oh, can we please?
Yeah.
So there is a song that even in the note I sent you, I call it the Get in the Van song.
Get in the Van song,
It is not called that. It's called Like It or Not.
Yeah.
It is so dark.
Yeah.
It is
that was
so
the one
dark.
that reminded me of Treble Charger's Red.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember that, but that's sort of like melodic, sweet, sort of melancholy sound.
And it's about a kidnapping. Like, it's
Get in the van next to Stan.
But at the end of the track, they just kind of go high in their falsetto in a tone I can't sing. But it's just that line, get in the van right next to... I slapped my knee, friends. Yeah. I actually slapped my knee. I love how beautiful that song is.
Yes.
And how effing dark it is. But it makes me howl.
And that's the thing that I love about musical comedy when it's applied properly. You can get these wonderful juxtapositions that really can punch up a joke.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, it's one thing to go dark and, to play sort of like twee off of that. But just because, like, when there's certain things that a song has, like, music is so ingrained in our psyche growing up.
Yeah.
And certain feelings and certain expectations when you hear things, to have it twisted that way is like the ultimate comedic turn.
Yeah.
And it's really, really amazing.
Yeah.
Now you have an album.
I do.
Sugar and Spice and Smirnoff Ice. Yeah. So did you get any, like, what kind of inspirations because I mean, that's much more story-based and autobiographical.
Correct. Yeah.
But did you pull any inspirations from your time working in this era and maybe, like, from this album at all?
I actually didn't. But I think for me, the absurdity, I always try and find the absurdity of life, which I think growing up in this era of Toronto comedy has always stayed with me, of the silliness of it. So while my album doesn't go into musical comedy, I wish I could sing and pen a tune to, Sugar and Spice and Smirnoff Ice. That would make a great little classic, 50s jive or something. But I think the influence is just trying to find the silliness in everyday life. I don't really dive into political stuff or, I'm not a raunchy, kind of in my tone or anything. Like, I'm pretty light. I feel I can try to be as relatable as possible, but I still try to find the absurdist stuff. Because, like, Brock and John, Kids in the Hall, SCTV, going into, like, Monty Python, when Letterman started and he was tossing, watermelons off the top of the building. I love that kind of bizarre stuff. So I do try to find, like, the silly and the mundane of life. So
I find that in Canadian comedy, in specific, we tend to have that thread in a lot of our comedians. Even topical, it just feels like it's there in the undertone of a lot of our work. Yeah. And I think it's nice.
I think it's nice, too, because it's like SCTV... And I mean, I've been, much like yourself, like I've been a longtime viewer of Saturday Night Live, and I love SNL. But what I always loved about SCTV and Kids was it was just so weird.
Yes.
And I love that. I haven't, and I mean, maybe, you know, if I do an album again or like a YouTube special, maybe I will try to find even more of the absurdist silliness in my life, because it certainly is there. But I just, that to me is like a comedy comfort blanket, you know, is that just the bizarro, like, you know, I referenced Arrogant Worms earlier, and they've got this like hot dog song, where they reference hot dogs as being the particle board of meat. And it's like, I love that kind of wordplay. Yeah. That's like a comedy goal, is to have that kind of thing in my arsenal where I can do something like that with words. So, yeah.
The good thing I find too, though, I mean, as much as we've lost a lot of these spaces, I still think that heart is in the Toronto comedy scene, at least in the sketch and improv world.
Yeah.
The stand-up world is different.
Yes, very much.
But, you know, I think it's there. Like, you know, I was at Sketch to the Death recently, and it was just there's this one sketch that was done where they just took cell phones from audience members. Like, they asked. They didn't take
for sure.
But they and it's like, oh, let's go through your last
God.
your hit run. It's like this, it's like a picture of Ellen, then another picture of Ellen, then another picture, and it's just like getting closer. And it was just like, this is weird. And it's like embracing that silliness. So I you know, and it's unfortunate we don't have as much of that in the stand-up world. We do. We have a few. I mean, like, Maria Bamford is a perfect example of somebody who embraces the sort of like bonkers nature. But I feel it's like left the common voice in stand-up.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm even thinking just now to like my writing style. I have long dreamed of like being a late night writer for Seth Meyers. That has been on the proverbial vision board for like ever. I'm not good at writing like I'm such a fan, but I am so not good because I've taken enough classes to know this is not my shtick. This is not my shtick. But I'm just realizing, sketch, I could write with my eyes closed, and all of the writing classes I've ever taken, that's where I've excelled in. So there's been something that I absorbed from my time, you know, back on the scene in the early 90s and watching those shows that did. So it's just like, you know, a matter of sort of finding, you know, where I fit in terms of comedy as like my one and only job, rather than like the 9th thing I do in my day so I can afford to be a stand-up comic. But I think there's something about Brock and John and all these guys that did make an impact on me, because when I do write a sketch, it's solid. I can do it so quickly, and whereas headlines, I am sweating to get 3 out, you know.
Yeah, during the pandemic, I took a class through Flappers, which they have wonderful. This is not a paid advertisement.
Yeah,
they have wonderful online classes that are still running.
Yeah, the late night writing one, I think, is the last one left.
Yeah, so I took the intro level late night writing one, and I got a couple of really good ones. And I had this is when Elon Musk sent space tourists up, and my teacher's like, well, check out this headline from like Kimmel the next day, and it was like literally my joke. And I was like, oh yeah, so signed up for the next level. 3 classes in, I'm like, no, I'm not going to waste this teacher's time. Very nice guy.
Yeah, but I know who you're talking about. And he's a really great guy.
And I actually appreciated his candor.
Yeah,
because it was like, oh, I need to go back and do more reps. Well, which is better than wasting his time and my time if I'm just not ready.
Well, he was the one who told me that the Tonight Show with Fallon, they hire a separate sketch team.
That makes sense.
So I'm like, that could be on the old vision board too.
Darn tootin'. You know, so. I mean, it's Jimmy Fallon, but
yeah, I mean, I
like Jimmy.
I do like Jimmy.
It's just I prefer Seth.
Comedy there, it's so funny how you can like, you know, want to do something so bad. And I was like, I want to be on that. And it's like, I can't. I suck at that. But I write good sketches.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm
I think the thing that makes me love Seth so much is how he elevates others.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right,
I like him a lot.
Yeah. So, and I mean, Jimmy does too. I mean, nothing against
There's a
Jimmy.
kindness to him, and there's a lightness that I think he's an interesting culmination of all the Tonight Show hosts, like where, you know, he's taken things. I think my favorite probably of all time would be Steve Allen.
Yeah.
Which I was not alive around when I was not alive when he was doing it, but but he had. But again, it was because that was new, you know, and that ground hadn't been broken before. Whereas that's sort of what it was like doing stage managing for these troops back in the 90s in Toronto. No one had been, we were trying to figure it out and what worked and what didn't work. And there's so much fun in that sense of play that, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's very much a direct line in that era. Because, I mean, if you look at the venues and the places and the spaces where they were located, a direct line from the punk culture to the sketch culture.
Yeah.
Because, and again, you know, I do more stand-up than I do sketch, but not to that line isn't there for stand-up. I mean, stand-up is, especially in the 90s, very corporate, with Yuck Yucks dominating the scene.
Yeah.
That was probably its peak, where it had the most venues across Canada, and it had its, like...
That's true.
Rough contract where they owned you as an act. But sketch didn't have the mainstream appeal that it did. I mean, it was respected because you had SCTV, but it had
But it was underground.
It's underground.
Yeah, it was underground.
This punk hungriness that you where it was like people out, like it's interesting. I think that it's like there's a wax and wane with the two styles of comedy because like when it's like the brick wall, Caroline's on HBO at its peak.
Yeah, Improv on Annie.
Yeah, and that's sort of like when sketch is sort of like at its low point in the popular culture and the just consciousness, not with regards to the quality, but with how it's recognized. And that I find is one of the most interesting stuff comes out because of that. We got Kids in the Hall. We got
In Living Color in the States.
Color,
yeah.
Mr. Show.
Yeah. Mad TV.
Yeah. So it's like it's a cycle. It's a cyclical kind of give and take. So I really appreciate you introducing me to this album.
I'm so happy to. I wish more people could hear it. It is so... If you can find it, it's called Unrehearsed by Brock and John. And if you can find it, you should be given $1 million because I don't know where it exists other than on the CD I am holding right now.
Or like in their attics or basements in a box somewhere. Like yeah. But well, if people wanted to find you, where can they look? Just see where you're playing or check out your posts.
Certainly. So on YouTube and Facebook and on X, you can find me under Kelly Zemnickis. And on Instagram and the quaint community that is Threads. It's the cottage community of social media. Come join us for a tea. It's so quiet and nice. You can find me under the Latvian Foodie. That's Latvian, the Latvian Foodie.
Great. Thanks very much, Kelly.
Thanks for having me.
Listening to Comedy Album Book Club, co-production of Far From Here Comedy and Showbiz Monkeys. Tune in next week for our next guest.